Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really significant book many of you have asked about.
Yeah.
Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score. Our goal here is to pull out the core insights, how trauma impacts our brains, minds, bodies, get those aha moments without getting totally bogged down.
Exactly. And van der Kolk's central idea that the body keeps the score, it really is revolutionary.
Yep.
Trauma isn't just a bad memory. It leaves this lasting physical imprint. It shapes our actual biology.
So we'll focus on the key stuff from the excerpts you shared.
Right. Give you that direct line to the most impactful ideas.
Yeah.
And to frame how far things have come. Think about this.
Okay.
Van der Kolk points out that even 5 years after the last U.S. soldier left Vietnam, the VA library, not one book on wartime trauma.
Wow. That really says something, doesn't it?
It really does. Shows the journey we've been on, just acknowledging this stuff. Okay, so let's dive in. How does trauma actually, show up, according to van der Kolk? Well, Daniel Siegel said the book gives this profound appreciation for the debilitating effects. And that core idea, again, trauma isn't just psychological. It fundamentally changes the brain, the mind, and the body.
He uses stories to make it real, right? Like
Yeah.
Tom, the Vietnam vet.
Exactly. Tom, it wasn't just bad memories for him, was it?
No, sounded much deeper.
It was. He was fundamentally altered by that ambush. Used to be a loyal guy, enjoyed life.
And then trauma just transformed
So the
it.
Kolk stresses it's way more complex than just, memories or brain chemistry. His whole personality shifted.
And that led to some really tough consequences, like
Yeah.
not being able to connect.
Yeah, exactly. He wanted to love his family desperately, but he just couldn't feel it deep down.
Wow.
Felt emotionally cut off, like behind a glass wall, he said.
That's such a stark image.
And it wasn't just towards them. He struggled to feel much beyond rage and shame sometimes. Even felt like he was watching his own life from outside.
Just completely disconnected. He also brings up Freud, right? Some earlier ideas.
Yeah, it's interesting. Van der Kolk sort of paraphrases Freud's idea about trauma being like suffering from memories.
Suffering from memory.
He uses Bill's case to illustrate it, like the past is constantly breaking into the present.
But it's not always clear story-like memories, is it? It affects perception, too. Imagination.
Totally. He talks about Rorschach tests, the ink blots. With traumatized vets, many either saw their trauma right there in the blots or they saw nothing, just blank.
So like a loss of mental flexibility.
Yeah, exactly. An inability to play with possibilities, to use their imagination like others could. They were stuck replaying the past, not engaging with the now.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And another isolating thing he mentions, the sense of division.
Oh, this is huge. The world splits in two.
How so?
There are the people who get it, who shared the experience, and then everyone else.
Right.
And survivors often feel like those who haven't been through it just can't understand. Leads to this profound isolation, even from family, friends, coworkers.
You're either in or you're out.
Pretty much an unspoken thing.
Okay, so these massive effects on emotions, relationships, what's happening inside the brain?
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Van der Kolk talks about the emotional brain.
The older parts.
Yeah, the reptilian brain, the limbic system, its main job, detect danger, release hormones, stuff that shapes how we feel, what we do, our internal alarm system, basically.
And trauma messes with that system.
Big time. In PTSD, the balance between the amygdala, that's the smoke detector always scanning for danger,
Right.
and the middle prefrontal cortex, the MPFC, that's like the watchtower that can calm the alarm.
Okay.
That balance gets totally skewed.
Yeah.
The amygdala goes into overdrive, hyperactive, but the MPFC's ability to say, hey, it's okay, that gets weaker.
So it's much harder to control emotions, impulses.
Exactly. Even small frustrations can trigger huge reactions.
He also says trauma is often pre-verbal, beyond words.
That's a key point. All trauma is preverbal. A state of terror so intense, words just fail.
Like in Shakespeare.
Yeah, he references Macbeth horror that strikes you dumb. We see it in trauma victims. They freeze up, can't speak. They literally lose their tongues.
And that connects to how the brain stores memories differently. Left brain versus right brain.
Right. Super interesting. The left brain handles the facts, the timeline, the story about what happened.
Okay.
The right brain, that stores the raw stuff, sensory input, emotions, sounds, smells, touch, the feeling of it.
And those right brain memories.
They can feel like absolute truth. Like this is just how things are. Even if the left brain's story doesn't quite match, it's a gut feeling, an intuitive sense.
Which can lead to dissociation. That seems central.
Oh, dissociation is totally core to trauma. The overwhelming experience gets fractured, split off.
Fragmented.
Exactly. The emotions, sounds, images, the physical feelings, they get disconnected from the event itself.
And then?
And they can just intrude, pop up out of nowhere. Feels like you're reliving it right now.
Like Stan in the fMRI scanner.
Perfect example. He wasn't remembering the accident. His body was reliving it, physiologically.
Wow. Okay, he also gets into the autonomic nervous system. Can you break that down?
Sure. So you've got two main branches. Sympathetic nervous system, the SNS. That's your gas pedal, fight or flight.
Right.
Parasympathetic, the PNS. That's your brake. Calm, rest, digest.
And trauma affects the balance.
It often messes with the flexibility between them. We measure this with heart rate variability, HRV.
HRV.
Healthy system, lots of flexibility, lots of variation. Trauma often reduces that flexibility. It makes it harder to shift gears between alert and calm. You get stuck.
Stuck on or stuck on off.
Could be either. Constantly wired or shut down and numb. That natural rhythm is disrupted.
And this ties into Porges's polyvagal theory.
Yeah, Porges really expanded things beyond just fight-flight. He brought in the social side.
Social engagement.
Exactly. Our nervous systems are constantly communicating with each other. We pick up tiny cues, facial expressions, voice tone, and they tell our bodies if we're safe or in danger. That feeling of, you're safe with me, it's profoundly biological. It calms the system.
That makes so much sense. He also mentioned alexithymia. What's that?
Alexithymia. It's difficulty identifying and describing emotions.
So you feel something, but you can't name it.
Or you feel it physically instead. Someone with alexithymia, especially after trauma, might feel physical pain or stomach issues instead of recognizing, oh, I'm scared or I'm sad.
The body's speaking, but the mind can't translate.
Kind of, yeah. They register the emotion as a physical problem, not a feeling needing attention.
And lastly, in this brain section, out-of-body experiences.
Yeah, and neuroscience is actually backing this up now.
Really?
Studies using electrical stimulation on a specific brain area, the temporal parietal junction, they've actually induced out-of-body feelings.
Wow.
So it confirms what many trauma survivors describe, that sense of detachment, like yourself is floating outside your body.
That's incredible. Okay, this gives a really deep picture of how trauma just gets in everywhere.
Yeah.
Let's shift to childhood trauma. That seems especially devastating.
It really is. Because early experiences shape our whole map of the world, you know? Van der Kolk and Nina did this study with abused kids, using magazine pictures. Even totally innocent pictures could trigger intense fear, aggression, terror in those kids.
So the world just feels dangerous to them. Full of triggers.
Exactly. Their internal model is built on threat.
And Bowlby's attachment theory comes in here too.
Crucial. Bowlby showed how vital secure attachment is. That feeling of being seen, understood, responded to by your caregiver.
That builds safety.
It builds the foundation for emotional security, for learning how to manage your own feelings later on.
And if that secure attachment doesn't happen?
Well, if a caregiver is inconsistent or neglectful or frightening, the child learns their own feelings aren't reliable or aren't safe to express.
They discount their own insides.
Yeah, they try to adapt to the caregiver. Winnicott said the baby learns to become the mother's idea of the baby. They learn something's wrong with how I feel.
But it's not about being a perfect parent, right?
Oh, absolutely not. Mistakes happen. Misattunements are normal. The key is repair. Does the child learn, deep down, that connection can be broken and fixed? Is there a fundamental sense of safety?
Kathy's point really hit me, about being told to be reasonable.
Oh, Kathy's insight is so important.
Why doesn't that help?
Because when you tell someone with that history to just be reasonable, it confirms their deepest fear. That nobody gets it. Nobody understands what it feels like inside them.
It just reinforces the loneliness.
Totally. It invalidates their whole internal reality. It's about feeling felt, not just being told what to think.
He also talks about child sexual abuse dynamics, Roland Summit's concept.
Right, the accommodation syndrome. It explains how kids get trapped through intimidation, isolation. And they often blame themselves. If they do try to tell, adults often deny it or don't believe them. It creates this conspiracy of silence.
So terrifying. And it seems the standard diagnostic manual, the DSM, it kind of misses this.
Yeah, that's a big problem with developmental trauma. Kids get slapped with multiple labels: ADHD, ODD, depression, anxiety.
That doesn't get to the root.
Often not. It doesn't capture the core issue, which is usually about profound fear, broken trust, disrupted relationships. Anthony and Marie's cases show that clearly.
And then there's the ACE study. That was huge, wasn't it?
Monumental. The Adverse Childhood Experiences study. It drew that clear line. Early adversity abuse, neglect, chaos at home
Leads to.
leads to a whole host of later health problems, physical and mental. It proved how deep this stuff goes, gets right under the skin.
He mentions animal studies, too. The rhesus monkeys.
Suomi's work, yeah. Really compelling echoes of the human findings.
Like what?
Identified monkeys that consistently struggled, really anxious ones and really aggressive ones. They showed biological differences early on, and those patterns stuck. Early stress just reshapes biology and behavior long term.
And Saruf's research on caregiving.
Saruf showed how consistent care helps kids learn self-regulation, managing their own arousal, calming down.
And inconsistent care.
Leads to kids being chronically revved up, physiologically, more anxiety, less ability to self-soothe as they grow.
The research on incest survivors. Putnam and Trickett. Sounds harrowing.
It is. Their long-term study found something really disturbing.
What was that?
Initially, when asked about stress, all the girls showed distress. Normal reaction. But years later, the non-abused girls still showed distress. The abused girls, they often just shut down, emotionally numb. Even their bodies stopped reacting strongly. A physiological numbing as an adaptation to chronic horror.
Just shutting down to survive. Key contrasts how different societies handle this stuff, right? Incarceration rates.
Yeah, he makes a powerful comparison. U.S. versus some Northern European countries.
And the takeaway.
The huge difference in incarceration, crime, health outcomes. It strongly suggests that investing in kids and families, creating stable environments, it pays off massively for society's well-being. Addressing adversity early matters.
And sometimes these memories don't even surface for years, like Jillian.
Right. Julian suddenly remembering childhood abuse decades later, triggered by a news story, shows how trauma can lie dormant, hidden.
Which brings us back to Janet's idea about different kinds of memory.
Exactly. Janet distinguished narrative memory, the story we tell about it, from traumatic memory.
And traumatic memory is?
Fragmented, felt in the body, lacks that neat beginning, middle, end structure. Irene's case, after her mother died, acting bizarrely, that's traumatic memory erupting.
And finally, traumatic reenactments. What's going on there?
It's like an unconscious drive to repeat the trauma. Freud called it the compulsion to repeat.
Why would someone do that?
The theory is it's an attempt, usually unconscious and often destructive, to somehow gain control over the original overwhelming experience, like the woman reenacting her escape or the vet staging robberies.
Trying to master it, but getting stuck.
Too much. It's complex, often heartbreaking, shows how deeply trauma imprints itself, especially early on.
Okay, it's a heavy picture. But the book does offer hope. Paths to recovery. What are the key principles for healing?
Well, a big one is owning oneself. Opening up to your inner world, your feelings, your sensations.
While shutting down.
Right, and shifting focus from the feeling that trauma is timeless to noticing that physical sensations actually come and go, they're transient.
Mindfulness helps with that.
Hugely. Mindfulness helps calm the nervous system, lets you observe what's happening inside without getting swept away.
And relationships. How important are they?
Absolutely central. Healing happens in the context of safe relationships. Family, friends, support groups, therapists.
What makes them safe?
Feeling seen, understood, accepted, having space to process the reality of what happened without shame or judgment. That safety is paramount.
If you're looking for a therapist, what should you look for?
Someone trained specifically in trauma, someone who knows various techniques to help you stabilize, process memories, reconnect.
And maybe someone who's done their own work.
Kolk suggests that's a reasonable thing to ask about, yeah. The key is finding someone curious about you, not just treating a label.
He mentions sensory integration, a bottom-up approach.
Yeah, bottom-up means working directly with the body's experience, not just thoughts. Sensory integration uses physical activities to help people reconnect with their bodily sensations. Ying Mi's story shows how it can help.
Interesting point about taking action during a disaster being protective.
Yeah, if people can actively help, do something constructive during or after a crisis.
It uses up the stress hormones.
Exactly. Channels that energy purposefully. It seems to lower the risk of long-term traumatization.
What about specific body-based therapies?
He talks about sensorimotor psychotherapy, somatic experiencing. These focus directly on the body's imprint of trauma.
How do they work?
Less focus on the story, more on tracking physical sensations, helping people build internal resources, feel safer in their bodies, and gradually widening their window of tolerance for difficult feelings.
Through pendulation.
Right. Gently shifting attention between a difficult sensation and a resource, like a feeling of safety or strength. It helps expand capacity bit by bit.
He also mentions hypnosis potentially coming back.
Yeah, as a way to maybe observe traumatic experiences without being completely overwhelmed. That ability to witness yourself is key for integration.
What about therapies like CBT or exposure therapy? How do they fit?
They can help some people for sure, but Kolk points out limitations, especially for complex trauma.
Why?
Completion rates can be low, like with vets. He argues you can't really process something if you're totally overwhelmed while trying to do it. Needs careful pacing.
And then there's the use of drugs like MDMA.
Yeah, he discusses the research using MDMA as an adjunct to therapy.
How might it help?
The idea is it can temporarily lower fear and defensiveness, allows people to access difficult memories and feelings while staying within their window of tolerance. Research is ongoing, but it looks promising for some.
And standard meds, like SSRIs.
They can definitely help manage the intensity of symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
make life more bearable, but often best as part of a bigger treatment plan, not the whole solution.
Right.
One study even found EMDR worked better than Prozac for PTSD.
Bill's story, with symptoms coming back years later.
Yeah, that really highlights that just managing symptoms isn't always full recovery.
You need to actually process the memories.
Exactly. Addressing those specific traumatic memories, like with EMDR, seems crucial for real integration, turning them from present threats into past stories.
EMDR, the eye movements, how does that work?
Well, the dual stimulation, the eye movements or taps or sounds while recalling the memory. It seems to do something unique.
Like what?
It seems to help the brain process and integrate the memory differently, connect the traumatic feelings with the present reality of being safe. It stimulates the brain's natural associative processes. Kathy's story is a great example in the book.
You mentioned talk therapy can have limit, too, language barriers.
Yeah, it can be really hard to feel the depth of a traumatic experience and simultaneously talk about it coherently.
The words don't always capture it.
Especially since trauma is often pre-verbal, right? Stored in sensations and feelings. That's why nonverbal approaches can be so vital.
Like art, music, dance.
Exactly. He acknowledges their value. While the science on how they work is still catching up, they offer other ways to express and process things words can't reach.
And safe communities are key again.
Absolutely. Finding places, support groups, understanding therapists where you can actually voice the pain without judgment, that's incredibly healing.
He also talks about numbing as a coping strategy.
Right. When inner sensations are just too overwhelming, people numb out.
How does that show up?
Substance abuse, eating disorders, compulsive behaviors, even extreme risk-taking, often attempts to either dull the pain or, paradoxically, to feel something, anything.
And yoga comes up again as a helpful approach.
Yes, another powerful bottom-up method helps people build a safer, more caring relationship with their own bodies. Learn self-regulation through breath and movement.
Like Annie's story. Initially terrified.
Exactly. Shows it can be scary at first to reconnect with the body, but ultimately deeply healing.
He talks about the cost of survival for resilient people.
Right. Survivors are incredibly strong, but often that survival meant disconnecting from their bodies, their feelings.
And self-hatred can be part of that.
Sadly, yes. Especially for kids trying to make sense of abuse. Blaming themselves can feel safer than facing the reality that their caregivers are unsafe.
He introduces internal family systems, IFS. What's that about?
IFS sees the mind as having different parts, like a critical part, an anxious part, a protective part.
All right.
And the goal is to access the core self, which is seen as undamaged, calm, compassionate, and help it understand and heal those parts.
Supports aren't bad.
No. IFS sees them as having protective intentions, even if their effects are problematic now. It's about understanding and unburdening them.
And peso-Boyden therapy,
Yeah.
PBSP. That sounds different.
It is. It uses role-playing in groups, creating structures.
You do what?
To let people safely feel old feelings and, crucially, create new, corrective, emotional experiences. Like Maria having people role-play the ideal mother she never had.
Giving the body a different experience.
Exactly. A visceral sense of getting what was needed back then. Mark's story about uncovering a family secret in a structure shows how it can rebuild trust, too. It bypasses talk to create felt change.
And neurofeedback, seeing your brainwaves.
Yeah, basically you get real-time feedback on your brain activity. You learn to consciously change your brainwave patterns.
How does that help trauma?
It can help calm hyperarousal, improve focus, regulate emotions. Lisa's story shows improve clarity. The key EEG brain maps can even show trauma patterns that don't fit standard diagnoses. Alpha-theta training seems particularly promising for PTSD.
So the brain learns to regulate itself.
With direct feedback, yes. It addresses the physiological roots.
And this links back to sensory integration issues, learning problems.
Right. Chronic childhood trauma can really disrupt how sensory information is processed, can contribute to learning difficulties. Neurofeedback might help address those underlying brain regulation issues.
He stresses agency, too, feeling in control in your body.
Yes. Agency is the opposite of the helplessness felt during trauma. Finding your voice, feeling like you can act and have an effect. That's vital. Being in your body, not dissociated.
Which connects to theater programs.
Absolutely. Theater offers amazing ways to build agency, community, emotional expression.
Like the vets working with Mamet, Shakespeare in the courts.
Great examples. Embodying characters, telling stories, working together. Incredibly powerful. He even suggests Greek drama might have done this for ancient warriors.
And Archbishop Tutu using singing and dancing.
In the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, yeah. Using rhythm, movement, shared sound to help people process horrific testimony. Communal processing. Pendulating between the horror and the present safety of the group.
The trauma drama program's mirroring exercises.
Fascinating, right? Getting kids to connect nonverbally. Tuning into each other through movement. Building that bodily awareness and empathy. Saying, I see you without words.
And the director Paul's philosophy.
Working alongside kids, not trying to fix them, empowering them. That's true trauma-informed care.
Larry's story in the theater exercise sounds transformative.
Huge breakthrough. Learning to access and tolerate deep, painful emotions in a safe space. That led to massive life changes. Shows avoidance doesn't work. Feeling does.
And Shakespeare in the courts using precise language.
Yeah, focusing on specific words to connect to the real feeling underneath rather than just making broad judgments helps articulate the inner world.
That actor confronting their own trauma through a role. Intense.
Shows how deep this work can go, using the self, the body, the voice as instruments for healing and integration.
Okay, so zooming out, the broader societal impact.
He circles back. Trauma disrupts everything mind, brain, body. The ACE study proves it. Heckman's economics research proves investing in early intervention pays off massively.
It's not just individual, it's systemic.
Totally. Poverty, isolation, lack of resources.
Yeah.
They fuel trauma. And trauma creates more trauma. It's a cycle.
The South African Truth Commission, Ubuntu, a model for collective healing.
A powerful example. Ubuntu. I am because we are. Recognizing our shared humanity is key to healing collective wounds. Acknowledging the interconnectedness.
Because we're social creatures, fundamentally.
Yes. Trauma devastates that social engagement system. So much mental illness after trauma stems from broken connections, unbearable feelings without support.
So interventions need to focus there.
Absolutely. Not just on faulty thinking, but on rebuilding safety, connection, regulation within relationships.
He mentions organizations doing this work.
Oh.
NCTSN, the Trauma Center.
Vital work. Developing trauma-informed approaches for schools, justice systems, everywhere, changing how systems respond.
Because schools can accidentally re-traumatize.
Easily. Punishing behavior that's actually a trauma symptom, spacing out, acting out. A trauma-sensitive school acknowledges the distress, helps the child calm down, then explores the cause, understands the behavior is communication.
So we should teach self-awareness, regulation in schools?
He strongly advocates for it. Quita skills, right alongside reading and math, especially vital for kids impacted by trauma, empowering them to understand their own systems.
And things like sports, music, arts again.
Yes. Opportunities for challenge, expression, teamwork, connection, all crucial for rebuilding agency and community after trauma.
And finally, that proposed diagnosis.
Yeah.
Developmental trauma disorder.
Right. An attempt to create criteria that better capture the unique, pervasive impact of chronic childhood trauma. Exposure, dysregulation, attention issues, behavior problems, negative self-view, all stemming from that early adversity.
Okay, so pulling this all together, the big takeaway from The Body Keeps the Score.
I think the core message is trauma hits deep. Body, mind, brain, all interconnected. But
Right.
crucially, healing is possible. And the paths to healing are diverse, often going beyond just talk or meds.
Those bottom-up approaches seem really key.
Definitely. Sensory integration, body therapies like somatic experiencing or sensorial yoga, creative arts. Working directly with the body's experience is often essential.
And safe relationships. Community. Absolutely fundamental.
Can't overstate it. Feeling safe, connected, understood. That's the bedrock of recovery. Trauma breaks connection. Healing rebuilds it.
All right. So as we finish this deep dive, maybe a final thought for you, our listener, inspired by all this. If we as a society really grasped how deeply trauma impacts us, physically, mentally, relationally. How might that change things? How could it lead to more compassionate, more effective ways to support people, prevent trauma in the first place? Could it foster a deeper sense of that Ubuntu, our shared humanity in our communities?
Something to really chew on.
Definitely. We encourage you to check out the resources mentioned in the book and our outline if you want to learn more. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.